Back to what I started with, Labor's plan for a voice, a kind of Aboriginal-only parliament, but advisory, they say. The Liberals still haven't said whether they're for this division by race or not. But today, Julian Leeser, the Opposition Shadow Attorney-General and Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, gave a speech on this very topic. And he joins me now. Julian Leeser, thank you so much for your time. Your speech ends with this line about the voice. We must get this right because the prospect of failure is unthinkable. Why are you so for changing our constitution to give people who identify as Aboriginals political rights not enjoyed by anyone else?
Well, Andrew, Aboriginal people are the only people under our constitution that we make laws about on the basis of their race. I've long been of the principle that you make better laws when you consult the people who are directly affected by those laws. That's why I've always been in favour of the principle behind the voice. But what I'm very concerned about is the way that the government has been running this referendum. They've been running this referendum with no process and no detail, according to a timetable that was set by the Prime Minister at a music festival at the end of the year for a referendum later this year. If the government is going to put a referendum on such a sensitive topic, they've got to bring all Australians with them, and they can only put the referendum if it's got a real chance of success. And as Peter Dutton has said to the referendum working group, and as I've said to other people, it's not on track for success at the moment, and there's two clear hurdles that the government needs to clear. Number one, they need to explain the nature of the amendment that they're putting forward. That amendment keeps changing, and to set up a proper process around it. Number two, they need to explain the detail of how this voice body would work. Peter Dutton sent 15 questions to Anthony Albanese back in January. Those questions still remain unanswered. We cannot expect Australians will be able to vote for something if they don't know what the detail of this body is all about.
I don't want them to vote for this, Julian, and I take you back. I think you kind of dodged the issue here. The Constitution does not say, we're going to make special laws for Aborigines. It's for people of any race, doesn't single out anyone. I think it's anachronistic now. But the Constitution that Labor wants to change would give one race, only people identifying as Aboriginal, a separate and extra legal entitlement to representation that is enjoyed by people of no other race in this country. And again, I ask, why would you want to change the Constitution to explicitly divide us by race?
Let me take you back to the racist power that you mentioned, Andrew, to answer your question. The racist power that says... But this is the principle.
Doesn't it disturb you at all?
The principle is that the racist power has only ever been used to make laws about Aboriginal people. They're the only people it's been used about since Federation. And in 1967, we changed the racist power. 90% of Australians voted to give the federal parliament the power to make laws about Aboriginal people. What we have seen through that time is a process of failure. The gap is not being closed. And what I think is that if you have a system whereby you can consult the people who are directly affected by the laws, you'll get a better outcome. That's the principle.
Already. Julian, you were part of a government that consulted the Council of Peaks, representing more than 70 different bodies, to draw up your Closing the Gap strategy. You were boasting about your consultation. The Council of Peaks, Pat Turner, she was boasting about the consultation. Now you say, well, actually, we never did consult. Let's have a totally different structure. On top of all that, on top of the 11 federal politicians identifying as Aboriginal, on top of the 30 land councils, on top of the Council of Peaks, on top of the 2,700 Aboriginal organisations. I mean... Well,
and Andrew, the Closing the Gap strategy is about particular service delivery to Aboriginal communities by the Coalition of Peaks, by the state and territory governments, by the federal government. And what we did in terms of the Closing the Gap refresh is, for the first time, we actually put all of the key actors online. Now, the Voice is dealing with a range of other options. When you look at the Indigenous colleagues that I have in the Parliament, I think it's a great thing that we've got more Indigenous parliamentarians. But they are there to represent their party, to represent their state, to represent their electorates. Their job is to legislate.
Well,
the nature of this body would be to advise.
You're all supposed to represent all Australians, regardless of race. That should be our future. But listen, let's not get hooked on this, because I kept asking Peter Dutton for the same questions, and I don't think I got a direct answer to what I'm after here. But listen, can I ask you, Julian, you also went with Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, around the country, looking at, particularly the outback, the results of Labor ending the cashless debit card that would stop people then, therefore, using welfare money, blow it all on alcohol, come back to the family and say to the kids, I didn't have money for food. What did you find?
Andrew, it's a shocking situation. I went with Peter Dutton last week to Laverton and Leonora in the Goldfields, two communities that had the cashless debit card. And since the cashless debit card has been taken away, there's more money in those communities. People are spending money on drugs, people are spending money on alcohol. There's an increase in the amount of alcohol-fuelled violence. In Leonora, one of the nurses at the hospital told us that 1 in 3 presentations by their account to the emergency room are from alcohol-fuelled violence. We've got a situation in Laverton where the council and the local mining company are providing food for children at school because parents are not spending their money on the basics of life. They're spending money on alcohol before they're spending money to feed their children. We've got a situation where the local shopkeeper there refuses to call the police when young people are stealing from him because he'd basically have the police stationed there the whole time. The cashless debit card was not perfect, but it provided a modicum of safety for these communities. That's what we heard, and they provided a normal life.
Here's the issue. Here's the issue for me, Julian. I thought your government was very brave with the cashless debit card. Kudos to you. But doesn't this show the voice is no solution? Because if we had the voice back then, that card would have been banned, and it would stay banned because Aboriginal organisations, particularly in the Northern Territory, were virtually united in saying it had to go. A voice would say that. A Liberal government, do you really think a Liberal government then would say, the voice may have said, get rid of the cashless debit card, but we, the Liberals, are going to ignore it? Would you do that?
The cashless debit card came in because local voices in communities were calling for it. And that's why the policy that we took to the last election was for the rollout of the local and regional bodies. Julian, I've just shown a list of organisations saying they wanted it gone. The Central Lands Council, for instance. You've got to listen to the local people on the ground.
The Council of Peaks wanted it gone.
Andrew, you've got to listen to the local people on the ground, and that is why we proposed, as part of our policy at the last election, and we funded it, $32 million for the rollout of the local and regional bodies, because the problems are fundamentally problems that exist in communities around the country. Since I've been the Shadow Minister, I've visited places like Alice Springs. It was the first visit I did with Senator Price. I've been to Ceduna. I've been to Palm Island. I've been to Rockhampton.
No, that's good.
I've been to Arnhem Land. I've been out and about on communities.
The Council of Peaks represents community-controlled organisations that were the people on the ground. They said get rid of it. So put it to you. If there's a voice, the voice says we don't want a cashless debit card, would a Liberal government ignore it?
I think it is completely open to a Liberal government or a Labor government for that matter to ignore advice that it's given by the voice or any other body for that matter. I think you've got to ground truth things by listening to people on the ground, and that's why we proposed the rollout of the local and regional bodies first. That was what was recommended by Calma Langton. That's what I heard repeatedly. If we're going to have a national body, it won't work as well unless there are local and regional bodies on the ground.